We're live. Cool. Hi, Steve Barsh from Dreamit in Philadelphia. If you're just tuning us in, sorry for the 5 or 6 minute delay. We just had a little technical issue. Wanted to welcome Ron Gula to Dreamit Live. Ron, thanks for joining us today.
I'm really apologizing to make you guys patch all your computers right before we started recording.
This is great. So we're going to chit chat for about 2 minutes and 30 seconds left as the audience builds and notifications go out that we're live on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And we'll start in just a couple minutes and we'll talk about common mistakes cyber entrepreneurs tend to make. Ron, how are you? Are you getting ready for the holidays? Are you ready for the holidays?
Yeah, getting ready for the holidays. So we celebrate Christmas. I wrapped
Yeah.
a whole bunch of presents this past weekend.
Right.
I was able to do that because our Baltimore Ravens won Thursday night, and I didn't have to watch football on Sunday. So I was able to be productive for a change.
Okay, we won't talk about our Philadelphia Eagles right now, but we'll talk about your Ravens. And any fun plans for the holidays?
So I have family in Ohio and upstate New York. We're going to visit both of them.
Cool.
And we'll be in Maryland for Christmas, which is a lot of fun. How about yourself?
Great question. We are going away to Mexico for 4 or 5 days, which should be fun. I guess you have to be a little brave right now to go to Mexico, but we're going to go, and should be fun. Usually we go on a cruise, and the kids last year were like, "Could we do something different?" Which is a very first world problem, I guess. But anyway,
Yes.
that's what we're going to do. So fun. And then kind of presents. You don't bring malware into your house or something, and the present is like you have to figure out if you're smarter than bugs and malware. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, what do you think? Just wait, chit chat, minute and 20 seconds. All of what's going on with Ring and Amazon, and what do you think about all that? And it just seems to me people not knowing how to configure and change passwords.
Yeah, well, one of the companies I found at Tenable Network Security, the research team, they are actually doing a lot of work in this area, and they found some major vulnerabilities. So, hats off.
Oh, really?
But a lot of people are just not configuring their passwords, right, and it freaks them out. And I don't know that that's their fault. I think it's the manufacturer's fault. We're bringing these devices into our homes, and they're probably not safe.
Right. Yeah, and bring them in at a rapid rate. The proliferation, I just even see in our home and other homes, the smart devices, whether it's the August lock or the Ring doorbell or the cameras, and it's really growing. And the problem is a lot of the people that are, when homeowners do a self-install, right? It's kind of complicated. Yeah.
It works for mom and dad, therefore it must be perfect and secure and stuff.
Exactly. It has to be kind of easy. So we'll start here in another 10 to 15 seconds. We'll just let the audience build. We'll get into it. It's tricky. Like imagine when it asks somebody, do you want to use WEP or WPA2 for your protocol? And like, what? And change your password. Have a secure password that you can't remember. Crazy stuff. All right, we're in. Can we go? Dustin, good to go? All right, we are good to go.
And we're right. Amen.
Yes. Ron, again, thanks for joining us. Ron, where are you today?
I am in Maryland at my home office.
Cool. In the Baltimore area, Baltimore suburbs, correct?
It's the Ellicott City. It was in the news a couple months ago, but last year for some flooding. And, but we're out of that area.
Okay. Cool. And thank you for joining us today. I'm in Philadelphia today. You're our first remote guest, which we really appreciate it. And we're working on the technology. But anyway, Ron, thanks for joining us again today. Love to start out with a little bit of your background. Can you talk about where you've been, what you've done, maybe a little on Tenable? Tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure thing. Like all successful cyber entrepreneurs, I started out at in the Air Force and worked for the National Security Agency, right? No, I kind of say that tongue in cheek.
Right.
I did start out in the Air Force, and my last tour was at the National Security Agency. Nobody called it cyber back then, but I was right there when a lot of the major things that kind of set up the last 20 years of cyber happened. I got to do some national exercises. I got to do some basic penetration testing on some really interesting things. And I thought that what I was learning was unique to the military and the government, and it wasn't. After that, I was really lucky. I got to go work for BBN. I got to go work for a cloud provider called US Internetworking. It was an application service provider. Had an idea. Yeah. While I was there, I was running this product called ISS Real Secure, which is a network intrusion detection system. And one day I had an issue, trying to track some hackers, and I said it would be really nice to change the rules in this product. and I couldn't, so I kind of came home and wrote one, and that was called Dragon. And
Right.
we like less than 2 years, we had it deployed at some major banks in the DoD. All
Right.
that being said, Dragon was
Wait,
acquired
what
by,
year was this again?
it was like 2000.
2000.
And all that being said, the gentleman who acquired Network Security Wizards was the name of the company with Dragon,
Mm-hmm.
worked for Enterasys Networks.
Mm-hmm.
We worked at Enterasys for a couple of years, but then we decided to start Tenable Network Security.
And was it
And
called Tenable from the very beginning?
it wasn't. And believe it or not, there's a security company in Ohio called Tenable Security. And every now and then we would get calls for like executive protection and like armored cars. And as much as that's cool, it's
Right.
not, patching and cyber hygiene
Right.
and whatnot. So
Mm-hmm.
ran Tenable. I was a CEO, CTO, and ran that for a long time, more than a decade.
Right.
And last few years, I got into angel investing, and that
Mm-hmm.
set us up to do Gula Tech Ventures, where we're doing primarily everything from Series C to A's and B rounds.
Cool, cool. A little bit more on Tenable so people have an idea of what that was and what you were doing at the time.
Yeah.
How,
So
how big did you grow it to? So as we talk about, like, as you're an investor and the companies, the advice you're going to give, like, how far along did you build that company? How much did you raise, revenue, those types of things, if you can talk
yeah,
about
so
it?
just to kind of put in perspective, so the first
Sure.
company, Network Security Wizards, we had 6 people when we were
Mm-hmm.
acquired. We had maybe 16 customers, and we were acquired for I'll say less than $20 million,
All right.
in cash. So when we did Tenable, we said, look, we've done this before. Let's go raise a bunch of money. And this was right the early 2000s, and nobody
Mm-hmm.
was investing, right? It was a down thing. So we, grew a cash flow positive business, and we grew that to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue really, really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that jokingly because it kind of took us 10 years to kind of get there. Um,
Right.
when I left, we had about 600, 700 people when I left.
Wow.
And, we were doing revenue all across the world. We had offices, we were business in every state. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was funny. I'd go to like a Baltimore Ravens game, and every logo in the stadium, was a customer, which
Wow.
was kind of cool.
That's
There
going to
was
make you
one
feel good.
year where we celebrated our 300th employee and
Mm-hmm.
our 400th employee in the same year.
In the same year.
So
Wow,
in
that's a
the same
lot of
year,
growth.
so that was pretty cool. And then for those who don't know, like what Tenable does, we're very famous for the Nessus vulnerability scanner. One of our
Mm-hmm.
co-founders, Renaud Darrison, wrote that. It's a
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability scanner. You plug it into a network, and it figures out all your devices and all your vulnerabilities. But that's really a disservice. If you think about how complex networks are,
Right.
Tenable today, you can audit Salesforce, you can audit your cloud applications, you can audit your mobile devices, you can audit your DevOps code. So,
Right.
and there's a whole different discipline for auditing IoT and ICS devices. If
Right.
one thing we did right at Tenable, we definitely invested in the technology well ahead of where the threats were going to exploit those things. So
That's great.
we were
That's
able
great.
to do a public offering last year.
Okay, so just to back up for a second on the raises, though. So did you bootstrap Tenable, or you raised,
Yeah.
or what was that
So
progression of that?
we bootstrapped, and was now it's kind of popular to kind of come to the
Mm-hmm.
East Coast and track cyber companies. But in the
Right.
early 2000s, it was really hard to raise money, in this area. I'm sure we can talk about that with what you guys are doing
Right.
coming out of Philly. I hear the same thing from Boston and New York City
Sure.
and stuff. Now it's a little bit different. But when we raised the $50 million that we raised the first time, not only was that our first A round, that was like
Mm-hmm.
a record-setting round for the Maryland region, and then we followed that up with like a $300 million raise, several years after
But
after that.
that $50 million was almost like growth capital. What was your revenue already when you raised the $50 million?
So it was, the point I'd like to talk about is that we
Yeah.
had $50 million in the bank at that time. So we had
Got it.
made cash flow
Mm-hmm.
positive year over year, yet we were still having problems kind of looking big. And I can remember, a good competitor to Tenable was Rapid7, and they had raised
Mm-hmm.
$50 million as well. And they were
Right.
going around telling everybody, look how cool, as a Salesforce should do. Hey, we just raised
Mm-hmm.
$50 million. You should be excited about us. We had
Right.
50 in the bank, and nobody seemed to care about that. And we're like, hey, wait a second, what, this is actually a lot more impressive to
Right.
grow a company like this. So we started doing that. And frankly, it really helped us not only get customers,
Mm-hmm.
but recruit people, and we were recruiting
Right.
people away from the government and government agencies and integrators and contractors like Northrop Grumman and stuff like that. So a company that was doing something like that, the more stable we could look like, the better it was to attract some of that talent that's really all over this region down here.
Raising can be a branding event, so it's cool. Let's dive in. You started to talk about a little bit about some of the investments in your angel investing today. So could you talk a little bit, what are some of the investments you've made recently, maybe some exits, and then we'll start getting into more detail.
Yeah, so you had the website up there. What we wanted to do, it's my wife and I. So Cindy and I, we worked at all the companies together, and we really wanted to example and inspiration, wherever you want to talk about it. There's a whole set of what I consider our East Coast entrepreneurs who are doing really well, and they love cybersecurity. They see it as an opportunity. They don't see it as, there's a bazillion companies and they're all copying each other. They really, there's a lot of innovation, and that there's so many things that we can help with, that we say, hey, let's do this. Now, a lot of people, they'll just do angel investing, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with angel investing. But there's this area in between being an angel and being a full-on venture capital fund where you have limited partners and you raise money and you go through a process. And we're kind of in that gray area in between. We actually introduce ourselves as cyber industrialists, because if we like a Series A company, well, we might put in some money and fill out a large round. We also might write a $50,000 check to people we met at a get together, and we try to work the entire ecosystem. So that's what we're trying to do with Gula Tech Ventures. We're trying to work across the ecosystem to try to actually get people to. So one secret, if you want to pitch me ever someday, just tell us that, hey, look, you want to invest in other companies. And I think about a third of our companies already invested in other companies, which the founders that is. So that's really
interesting. So you're saying the founder says we angel invested in something, and then you want to angel invest in them, or you want to invest in them.
Absolutely.
Got it. That's cool.
Because that's how we get this ecosystem going. And if you're going to invest, you're going to start a company. Of course, you want to make money. Of course, you want to be successful in business. But we really want to solve cybersecurity. And I just think if we are going to actually make a difference and really do technology has to be one of the pillars of that.
Got it. I thought somehow the secret that you were going to give away, something again with the Ravens game. It's all the Baltimore Ravens. See me at the stadium. All right. So you're doing these investments. Just a question again as we dive into things, right? How many cyber startups reach out to you, every week, every month? Like, what's that flow look like? Because I want to calibrate some of the questions, and the people that are watching this live or recorded, how frequently people are reaching out to you.
So one of the reasons we have the website, why we post a lot on LinkedIn, why we do the blogs, is not only to just increase the awareness of the companies we're working with, but to make it easy for people who want to raise money to come find us. So I'll get hit up with investor@gula.tech, which is a great way to email us. I'll get people soliciting me on LinkedIn. And then, once you've actually made some investments and you're sort of on the record, there's a whole sort of crew of bankers and people who help people raise money who will send you decks and send you pitches and do introductions.
And we do that, right? We send our secure tech companies too.
It's part of the ecosystem, right? Yeah. One of the other things that we've been doing is we've been lucky enough to be able to be LPs in other funds, so that some of those funds, they will run deals past us, and that's very exciting as well.
So, but the thing I'm looking for, if you could comment, because we're going to talk about all the mistakes you see and the dumb things people say and do. And the idea is, are you seeing 10 companies a week, a day, a month? Like how many times, the mistakes we're going to talk about, how frequently do you see them?
Yeah, some weeks it can be as high as 10 or 11. And, I have a certain set of partners I like to run deals by, and I have certain things that, you develop this sort of ecosystem. Well, this, venture capital firm invested in this firewall company, so you really can't send them a new firewall deal. So you have to kind of be a little selective about who you're going through. But one of the, I think before RSA and after RSA are usually the big times when I see a lot of stuff. And that's, very cyclic in nature. But one of the things that struck me just after doing this for about a year and a half, was how bad the pitches were.
Right.
And this is what inspired me to kind of write the 5-slide pitch deck guide.
Okay, so let's get into that. So again, calibrating, you say maybe sometimes 10 a week. That's 40 a month, maybe 300 to 400 companies a year reach out to you, and so many people make the same mistakes in cyber. So let's get into it. Talk a little bit about the Gula 5-slide pitch deck. What goes into that?
So it's real simple, right?
Yeah.
So one is, what problem do you solve? And you'd be so surprised how many people talk about their tech or talk about the market or something. It's like, what problem are you solving, right?
I think we see the same thing, by the way. A lot of times we talk to cyber startups or startups in general, and they're 5 or 10 minutes into their deck, and you're like, stop. I still don't understand. What problem do you solve?
Yeah. And then the second thing is, how do you solve it? And a lot of times people will mix these together, but not a lot of times. I mean, if we're going to do innovation, the problem and the answer are not always. There's a lot of ways to build a mousetrap, right? That's the classic thing we've always heard. So how you solve a problem and what problem you solve are really two and very, very important things that every investor, you can hook them. If you've got a good problem that needs solving and a great way to solve it, man, that's like the opening part from like Star Wars. I mean, you're just hooked. And I visually have seen investors sitting around a table getting pitched where somebody doesn't start with these two things, and you can see the eyes rolling, the interest, people checking their phones, that sort of thing.
Do you want to hear the problem first? And I have a thought on that, but is that you really want the what first?
People will pitch me and they might put what they're solving first, and I'll be like, okay, well, that's great. What I mean, their technology first. I'm like, if I have to tease it out of them, I'm not going to be a jerk about it. But at the same time, if you follow these 5 slides, we'll go through them here in a second. These 5 things, you can take an hour meeting and get it done in 15 minutes. And one of the big complaints from startups is that, wow, it's so hard to do fundraising. And it's like, well, if you're doing 90-minute meetings and you're not being effective and you're going to do one of those every day, no wonder you don't think it's exciting, because you're not focusing on what you're doing. So
quick note, and then I'll let you go through your 5, is we find we like to hear the problem first also, what problem you're solving. And I always say to entrepreneurs, like, put guardrails in my mind. We see so many things every single day. Just help me calibrate, like, what problem first. And then, that's
and it's, like, what problem you're solving? Oh, we're trying to solve cybersecurity. So you got to be a little calibrated with how high or how low. On the other hand, if you led with, we're going to decrease CPU utilization on perimeter gateway firewalls. Well, that might be a little too deep, right? So you got to have that level.
Okay.
So you got the problem,
so 2 was how?
Solution. So the third thing is some proof. And this is where again, it's a style thing. It could be a demo you did for a customer, a national labs deployed it. It could be a patent. If you are coming in to ask for money and to say how to solve a problem, great, do it. I was a consultant for 5 years. I did incident response for 4 years, and I ran into this all the time. That's your proof. Where is that sort of idea coming from? And anything you can prove there is good. And then we got to talk about money. That's the fourth thing, right? If you're going to raise money, how much? What are you going to do with it? Where are you going to be? Is it a year from now? Is it 2 years from now? And then, but the last thing I really, really want to hear is, what is their vision of the world? And when I say vision of the world, I'm looking for some perspective. So if it's a first-time CEO, is this a feature that's going to be on the back of a Microsoft or an Amazon or a Checkpoint, or is this a big company? Is this a platform? And I get a lot of people who are, it's okay to be confused about features and platforms. And, some platforms are features for IBM, when you think about scale and whatnot. But really what I'm looking for is, you have to, if you're pitching somebody like me, you have to realize that we might be able to write a check and just buy your company right now. And this, if you think about, hey, I'm raising $2 million on a $6 million thing. If it's a great company, well, why not just write an $8 million check and tell you what, we'll go make a lot of money together, but you really need to pay attention and have this kind of CEO and that kind of stuff. And I always ask people that question: what would you do if somebody offered you this amount of money today? And that really gets into, what is their vision of the world? What do they want? What do they want for their families? I'll usually pivot that conversation with, have you done any tax planning? What happens if Checkpoint called you tomorrow and put a $20 million cash deal on the table? What about moving to Europe? I've had companies do exits, and what's your vision? What are you willing to do for you, your partners, and your employees? And so that vision thing's tough.
Do you hear, by the way, a lot of times when we ask the question around vision, people say my exit strategy is, and it's like, I didn't ask you your vision. I didn't ask you your exit strategy. What's your vision?
Yeah. And there's certainly nothing wrong saying I want to get and be a cash flow positive company and focus on my customers and create tons of value for my customers and my investors. And I'd like to do this for 5 or 10 years. There's nothing wrong with that answer. But I want to know what their vision is so I can get behind that.
So those 5 steps, those 5 pieces, the Gula 5, is there one or two you see that people consistently screw up? Or is it just they don't hit all 5?
Yeah, they, it could be a number of different things. One could be that vision and the, where are we going to go from it? Just because, especially if it's a first-time entrepreneur. Like I like to deal with a lot of people who come out of the intelligence community and the DoD. I'm not going to expect them to know market rates on revenues and investing or, discounts because you're a service provider and not a product tech vendor. So that's fine. On the other hand, people who try to come in and say, well, my tech is better than somebody else. Well, how much better is it? Is it 5% better? I get pitched a lot on people who say, well, we can find vulnerabilities better than Tenable. Or I can find alerts and malware better than CrowdStrike, and they'll produce, some sort of statistic. I'm like, okay, let's assume that's true. What's the cost for a company to switch from a Tenable or a CrowdStrike to your company? How realistic is that?
Right.
And this is a big one of the big mistakes that people make when they go into the cyber startups is they really overvalue the quality of their technology, which kind of stinks because I'm a technologist, right? I want the best technology, right?
Right.
But the best tech doesn't always win, and that's a huge problem that a lot of people have a hard time getting around of.
Got it. And, let's just drill into that a little more. We see that also, and I think what you're talking about, Steve Jobs used to say, if you want to win, you have to be an order of magnitude better.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of entrepreneurs make that mistake. If I look, here's my iPhone 11 Pro, right? So I just got this. I had an iPhone X or 10, not the XR. I don't know what phone you have, but it's the example I use with entrepreneurs all the time. Pull out your phone, and they'll have a Samsung Note, 6. How come you don't have the 10? It's like, it's good enough. You mean just like your vulnerability scanner? It's good enough. It's not an order of magnitude better. Is a big hospital system, a big corporation going to really buy your product and install it and implement it if it's incrementally better? I think that's what you're saying too, right?
Yeah, and so one of the things that running Gula Tech Ventures allows me to do is volunteer. I'm on the board of a nonprofit called Defending Digital Campaigns. And I've been able
political.
Yeah,
campaigns?
so if you were running for Congress and you knew me when I was at Tenable and I said, hey, here's free vulnerability scanning for you, there's a limit, right? There's an in-kind donation.
Right, correct.
So DDC gets around that. We're authorized by the FEC or the Federal Election Committee to do that. But my point is we're dealing with campaigns. So campaigns tend to be very underfunded from an IT point of view and just not really aware of this. So now imagine bringing all the companies you see at RSA to a meeting with there's nobody in IT and you want to deploy these things. This is a great example of market fit, right? The best solutions maybe deployed by Exxon and Citibank and AT&T aren't necessarily the best solutions, for small groups of people trying to work and collaborate together. So that's another big mistake people make is how is your technology going to get into the hands of your buyers? Who are your buyers? What's your market fit there?
Okay, interesting. Cool, we'll move around a little bit using your 5 slides and a couple of things else. Do you find in mistakes that cyber entrepreneurs make about how they talk about competition? I didn't see in your 5, and you have to limit somewhere, but where do they talk about and how do they talk about competition or lack thereof?
Yeah, it's a lot of a big red flag is somebody who says, oh, we don't have any competition. Now, granted, there's somebody working on there on some new thing that we haven't even thought about, right? I don't know, space-based quantum interference detection of email passwords, right? Or, who knows, right? It's some threat we haven't even thought of yet. Those exist. And I will get pitched occasionally with companies who they're way ahead of everybody else, right? Problem with that is if you're way ahead and you don't have any competition, how do you build a business on that, right? Do you have to wait for the market to come to you? But for almost everybody else, and I'm going to say for 95% of it, you need to define what market you're in. And if you're having a hard time doing it, maybe you haven't found a buyer. Maybe you're taking an established market like firewalls or access control, and maybe you're really applying it to a vertical like healthcare or
Right.
like small doctor's office healthcare. So being able to define that really allows you to define who your competition is. And if you get it right, then almost everybody you talk to will understand what you're talking about. If you get it wrong, you will be continuously answering questions about who your competition is, who your market is, what's the size of the market. And this is just something I've seen a lot of people get wrong.
Right. It's interesting because you almost intertwine competition and go-to-market strategy. Like, well, are you signed to healthcare? You're signed to everyone's selling to finance, and you need to define who's the target market, what are you going after, and then what's the competitive set going after those types of customers.
Yeah, and almost every company has a line that they don't want to cross. I'll give you a really good example.
Company meaning a startup, or you mean the customer?
Well, everybody.
Right.
So, like for example, with Tenable, we could detect malware. When we do a vulnerability audit, and a configuration audit, we're looking at all the registry settings, where all the hashes of the processes running, and as part of our audit, we were comparing that against hashes and malware data from Reversing Labs. I would have a hard time arguing that Tenable was a leading malware, type company, right? But at the end of the day, that's an amazing audit, and it's 100% of the software on your system. Almost every company I deal with has something like that, where they don't want to cross into that because maybe the current ecosystem is somebody that they're partnering with or they complement with, and they certainly don't want to compete against.
Right. Interesting. So we talked about that not always the best technology wins. Is there also an issue around defensibility? Like you have an edge. I have something that's a better vulnerability scanner than Tenable. Do you worry about, can you maintain that defensibility of technical advantage when you're evaluating pitch deck in a startup?
There's some basic things like, okay, did you write this? Was it open source? Are you, you said you were a U.S. company, but you're not. You're really based in I don't know, Brazil or whatever. So there's a certain amount of diligence that says, as a business, you want to get into that kind of stuff. But if you don't own your IP, that's a hard time. I was pitched a company recently where, they claimed that they were going to rewrite, this OEM component from another vendor, and they're just going to get that done pretty quickly. And I think they could do it. But as part of a diligence, I'm probably going to call that other vendor and be like, hey, how do you feel about this? Is this a partner of yours? Is this, what are you guys going to do in this kind of space? So, owning your IP, having all of your employees that are on books and whatnot, these are really basic things that should come out in diligence, but aren't really going to be something I'm going to really dive into until it's time to kind of write a check.
Got it. Okay. Let's move the conversation to a different point. We see this problem. We had an interesting guest we had on Dreamit Live a week or two ago was Dan Constantino. He's the CISO of Penn Medicine and kind of brought up a couple points like this and love to get your viewpoints. How important do you feel for a startup you're talking to, are they addressing a top 10 CISO, CSO problem? Do you ever talk about that?
Yeah, and a lot of times the top 10 for a CISO is different for the CISO across the street from them, right? So maybe some CISO has yet to implement two-factor authentication. And if they're implementing two-factor authentication for the first time, maybe they're not going to go with a startup, right? Maybe they need to go with the Gartner, upper right, magic quadrant. So a lot of times these CISOs have problems that they're not going to get to for another year or two. And that's okay. That's a great time to do a startup to focus on that so that you can get some market traction by the time that's a big deal. A good example of that is we've got a company we've invested in called Scythe. Scythe actually allows you to create, implants to make your red team really act like China, Russia, a really, really amazing adversary.
Right.
And this is part of this, like that whole breach and attack simulation type space. But the people who kind of came first in that market were early. They just focused on, are your settings correct, and not really is your team kind of positioned to kind of go after these threats from amazing industrial espionage actors that are out there. So this is the kind of thing that CISOs have on their roadmap, maybe in 2021, 22 down the road. So that's the kind of thing I look for when we're investing in companies. When are people going to actually buy this?
Got it. So you look like down the road, but I guess part of it is that you're trying to figure out, will it ever be a top 10 problem? I guess some of the things that we
Yeah.
see as you look at things like, I don't think this is a big problem that people are going to spend money on today or 2 years from now.
Yeah,
Is the
and it
concern.
like I don't want to talk about specific companies and whatnot, but like one of the things I'm seeing is a lot of companies who want to make your migration to the cloud a lot more easy. And about
And
4 years
secure,
ago,
hopefully.
yeah, and secure.
Right.
But a lot of organizations were. Well, it's funny that I try to avoid saying like terms like a lot and many or whatever, but
Right.
the cloud's being adopted, right? I think we can all
I
agree
noticed that.
on that. But I will say that there's still some holdouts of people who want to do things on-prem, they want to do things hybrid, and all those things you hear about cost, being locked into your cloud vendor and whatnot. So any type of company that can play to those sort of heartstrings or concerns could really allow somebody to do that.
Okay, cool. Just a reminder for the audience, again, we have today with us Ron Gula from Gula Tech Ventures and co-founder and founder of Tenable. If you're just joining us, we love when people let us know what city they're streaming in from. If you have questions, please put them in the comments section. We have a few questions already, but we'd love to take your questions as we get through the chat. Probably go for about another 10 minutes or so. And thanks for joining us. Okay, next question, Ron. You brought it up a little bit earlier about along comes credibility and honesty of a founder. Do you find sometimes that people aren't upfront about issues? You discover them a little later as an investor before hopefully you've written a check. Can you talk about some of those kind of landmines
Yeah, so
or pitfalls?
investing in a company it's basically almost like starting a business or getting married. You are going to be working very closely with your investors. I mean, there's some investors who are very hands off. Here's a check, go conquer the world, but don't call me, kind of thing. Most of the cyber investors that I deal with are very involved. They want to join your board. They want to be there when you make a mistake. They want to help you learn, quicker and that. So any type of static where you're either not upfront about a mistake or not upfront about something, or God forbid, they lied or misrepresented about a customer, a partner. We all know each other. Like I'm in a company right now with the logos of the investors. It's like the who's who of cybersecurity. So if somebody says, "Hey, we worked with CrowdStrike, we worked with Tenable," I know people there, right? So it's pretty easy to follow up. And more than once, I've seen logos says we're working with this vendor, and I called the vendor and never heard of him.
Never heard of them.
Never heard of him. So that's that's tough. And then with my wife and I, it's pretty easy for me to be upfront and say, well, is there a relationship here? And even if there isn't, I like to ask questions about how do you make decisions? How do you resolve this? Do you have the same priorities as your 3 or your 2, or if you're a single founder, what are those decision processes there, and how do you resolve conflict? And that's a great thing to go into. And a lot of times, if somebody is not upfront with how they're doing that kind of stuff, it does come out almost immediately.
And then what are some examples? Like you mentioned earlier about open source or IP, or what are some examples that you've backed away from a deal where, again, the title of this episode, right, is Avoiding 5 Common Cyber Entrepreneur Pitfalls. What are some of the things you've seen, and maybe more than once, where an investor's going to back away? Be upfront from the beginning. Don't let you find it.
Right. So, we're all human. We all have biases. I try to be very upfront about the biases I'm at least aware of. So a good one is, with Tenable, we kind of controlled Nessus, right? That was our IP, and we control that. My friend Marty, he was the author of Snort and wrote SourceFire. So there's other companies out there who do things with data from Tenable and data from SourceFire, well, Cisco, of course.
Right.
And now there's been, if we go back to network intrusion detection, you've got Suricata and you've got Bro. Bro was renamed. I'm blanking on it. I'm going to probably get called out on that. But, the Corelight owns basically, the Bro products. That's the kind of company where, hey, you own your IP. Part of your go-to-market is this open source tech, and you're going to grow that, and that's phenomenal. But if somebody came along and said, hey, I want you to invest in our company. We have this open source technology. It's the basis of almost everything we do. The value we added was reporting, an appliance, a GUI, maybe a custom threat feed, some integration. That's not the kind of company I like to invest in, because I think the base of that company is just it's tough to long-term You can still make money. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
There's a lot of companies out there who make money doing that. It's not typically what I like to invest in. There's people who've made millions of dollars out there doing that strategy, but mind you, just not
But
my preference.
but your point is they're not being open, that the core is based on open source. They make it sound like they've created something all on their own, and it turns out they haven't.
And almost every company has open source
Sure.
components in what
Yeah.
they're doing, right? There's a Java engine, right? There's
Right.
HTML, there's
Sure.
a Nginx, web server somewhere in there, right?
Uh-huh.
But to say the core of what you do is this open source thing that you have no control over, that's tough. I really don't like that. Another good example is, understanding where you are on the food chain. So, like, let's say you're in orchestration, where your job is to take events from other things, bring them together, add some value, and deliver a result. Maybe an alert, report, a searchable index. Okay, that's great. Well, how many things do you have inputs for? That's a long list of vendors that you've got to integrate with. And I'll look at something along those lines and I'll be like, look, that's a lot of engineering. It's more than you realize. There's nothing wrong with that as a business strategy, but you have to realize that your investment there is probably light compared to what you need. So those are the kind of things I'm looking for is like, do you understand how much investment it's going to take to do this? And do you have any sort of unfair advantage over other people in this market?
Got it. I'll just tell you a couple things that we see where people start to strain credibility, and it starts small and then starts to snowball. They have their team slide up and they're talking about their team, and you go and you do a LinkedIn search and there's 6 people on the team slide. It turns out the person in front of you is the only person who's full-time. Everybody works somewhere else, but they position it and they make you believe like this is my full-time team. And then you press on it and it turns out it's not true. You're like, oh, well, that's not what I meant. It's the way you made it look.
And again, there's nothing wrong with not having 100%
Right.
people. Just don't present it.
Right. Be
Like
upfront
we've been
about
working
it.
on this problem together for 6 years, because
Right.
then you have IP issues, who had this
Right.
invention when,
Right.
and that can get kind of interesting.
And the other one that you mentioned also is they put up their logo wall of all their customers. And you start drilling down on it, and they're like, they're not customers. And well, this we're just talking to, but you had it up a logo, and here's who's using it. And again, what we start to find is where there's smoke, there's fire. And if we're just dating, we're not married yet, right? And we're in a second conversation, we're already finding, and the bullshit meter starts going up. You're like, okay, wait. If we're just getting started and we're finding issues like this, and you're not being straightforward with us, this isn't a great way to start a long-term relationship. So, anyway, you talked about, well, just to pivot the conversation, you talked about technology, and technology doesn't always win. And if it's incrementally better, can you talk a little bit maybe what you look for in sales and marketing? Like, is there a certain level of talent or cyber startup talent that you're looking for, exceptional from a sales and marketing point of view, that can really help these companies build?
Yeah. So when you're small and you're pre-revenue, anybody who's spending money with you is if it's an enterprise, they're going to invest in you. A lot of enterprise, rightly so, will spend money on smaller startups. They want to be innovative. They want to take advantage of the next best thing. And almost 90% of the time, they're going to work with the founders, right? The CEO, the CTO. And they really want to have that sort of trust of confidence of, is this problem something they understand, and go on. So when I talk about sales and marketing at a small company, there really is no sales and marketing, right? It's the founder,
It's
right?
the founder or the founding
it's
team.
approach, it's the website, it's all that. That's all you're going to work with. And frankly, for your next couple of years, until you get to like $3 or $4 or $5 million in revenue, you're not going to have what I consider a formal enterprise sales team where you've got a sales kickoff and you've got KPIs and you've got, because it changes your culture. And this is one of the hardest things for small companies to kind of grow into that. They're going to have fits and starts. They're going to they might hire the world's best sales lady, and she might kill it from a point, but it might be the wrong culture for the founders. It could be that maybe the salespeople they hired were too senior. Maybe they were large New York City enterprise financial, right? And they're just not the right people to kind of go into healthcare or the Midwest or that. So it's really
to drill into that for a minute. If you saw a 3 or 4 person startup and one of them is title is VP of Sales, and the company's a year old, they're almost pre-revenue, the person comes from some big organization running a big sales organization, is that a good thing or a bad thing that you have a VP of Sales that early?
Yeah, it depends. So typically, if it's a three-person company, I like to see that they are all, chief whatevers because they're people. But throwing around VP titles at a very, very young age is more of a red flag for me than that. I like to see a CTO. I like to see
Hmm.
CEO. I like to see,
Right.
COO and stuff like that. But starting out as VP of sales can be rough. I've seen it. I've seen it,
Hmm.
especially with experience. But more often than not, it's going to beg a question if it's
Right.
not commensurate with the background.
Yeah, and it's just one of the things that we've seen, just I have a bias on that, is a lot of times you'll hire somebody who's a very strong former VP of sales and they're not willing to carry a bag anymore. What's their quota? Well, why need to build out the team? It's like, whoa, you need your first 4 or 5, 10 customers, and you're going to
Yeah.
have to are you going to get your knuckles dirty and sell? No, well, I'm beyond that. I'm a VP of sales
And
now.
this is it's a good question because a lot of
Yeah.
technical founders don't understand that the process of sales is a very scientific and
Right.
engineering focus. Like
Hmm.
pretty much at the end of the day, you're going to invest a certain amount in your sales team, whether it's marketing, channel, people, whatever, and you're going to actually be able to mine, out of those customers, new leads, new customers. And I hate to sound crass like that, but an amazing product with a slick website does not sell itself.
Right.
You do need to fight to get your great ideas into the best companies in the world, and that's what your sales team does. Because if you don't do that, there's probably 5 or 6 other competitors in your region who's going to do it for you.
Can we just to go a little deeper on that? Is this one of these common cyber entrepreneur pitfalls, right? That they don't understand the sales cycle and how to sell to large enterprise. Is it true that most of the companies you're investing are like B2B and selling large enterprise, I would assume, or SME?
So there's a good bit of them that are large enterprise. We have a couple that focused on SMB and even smaller. So, for
All right.
example, Huntress Labs is an endpoint, malware detection, and they make the MSP. There's thousands of these managed service providers
Sure.
across the country. They make them the hero, right? They detect the malware and they basically put it into a situation where they can leap into action. The reason I kind of go into that is because almost every other SMB pitch I get is really just a failed enterprise technology that they say, well, let's try selling this to small business. And they don't really understand how the business of IT is done in those areas.
Right. And how to sell to it and how to get it in. Okay,
Exactly.
interesting.
Exactly.
Let's see if there's anything else I want to ask you. Just any other big things. You're talking to a whole bunch of cyber entrepreneurs. These are the 5 common pitfalls. If there's 1 or 2 last things, please don't do this. And if you're
Yeah.
doing 1 or 2 things, please make sure you're doing this correctly.
So I think the last mistake I kind of would touch on would just be valuation focus.
Oh,
I've
right. I
actually
meant to ask
seen
you. Thank you for
I've
bringing that
seen
up. Valuation. Yeah.
great technology,
Yeah.
great founders, great company with absolutely no knowledge of the market when it comes to valuations. And I've seen it screw up a company. I've seen it delay success,
Right.
a couple of years. I've seen it stem from that first question: what's your vision of success? Right?
Hmm.
Do you want to be a millionaire? Right? Do you want to be a successful entrepreneur? Those things are not necessarily the same thing. Do you want to have people who are successful in your company? Right? Do you want to help them pay off their college? Pay off, their home loans, their school loans, buy a Tesla, whatever your dream of success in America is. If you can't sort of put a definition of what that is, then you can't look at an acquisition or investment or evaluation, as a term of successful outcome or not. So I've just seen a
But
lot of people screw that up.
but what are they getting wrong with valuation? And what's your advice? What should they be doing right? What are they doing incorrectly?
So there's a couple things. So one, not knowing what you want as an investor. Like let's
As an
this is
investor or a startup?
as a I said investor. Thank you.
Yeah.
As a
Yeah.
as a start as a
Yeah.
founder.
Yeah.
If you don't have your financial goals
Hmm.
in line, and then one day somebody comes along and makes you an amazing deal,
Hmm.
how do you know? How do you
Right.
know? And then, like, I'll give you a good example. So when we sold our first company, Network Security Wizards, we sold that pretty quick, 2 years,
Hmm.
and now we're millionaires. We're whatever. We did really well. We're
Right.
successful entrepreneurs now. Whatever. Um, I've had many venture capital people. Oh, you should have raised $10 million. We could have grown that into a public company. Or as a first time CEO, that's tough. You don't
Right.
know what you're missing out. So I have some of these small companies. I don't really want to talk about some of the exits that have happened, but if it's one round of
Sure, let's
financing,
talk
two rounds of
exits.
financing,
Yeah.
the top people in that company do extremely well, and now they're a successful entrepreneur.
Right.
But they're not on the cover of Venture magazine or anything like that. That's a great outcome, and frankly,
Right.
I would love for America to have hundreds, if not thousands, of more of those people than 10 more Mark Zuckerbergs, right?
Right.
I want these companies to be created and moved on. So that's something I really try to tell people. And a lot of times we'll see people, it could be greed, it could be lack of market awareness. It could be people not understanding that maybe a stock deal that's 3x evaluation than maybe a cash deal has different outcomes for themselves, their employees, and their families.
Right.
So it's important for people to pay attention to things like taxes. Where are they living? Where are they going to live after a transaction goes through? And that's part of that whole vision thing.
We just see sometimes on our side is valuation is sometimes a little unrealistic. People don't understand some standard ratios. Roughly, if you're raising 2 million, we're going to guess that it's a 10 million post because you're early you're selling. It's about 20% of the company, and a lot of entrepreneurs just don't understand that it's kind of formulaic sometimes in the beginning. Depends if you're building Tenable and you're already doing 50 million in revenue. That's more like a private equity valuation, but we see people make mistakes. And the other thing is just, I don't know if you're here, Ron, why should I give you 20% of my company for $2 million? You're not giving me anything. I'm buying it. So anyway.
Exactly. And those kind of things go back to, what do you want as an entrepreneur, right? Do you want to get your first exit under your belt? Do you want to, maybe this is your second exit and you really want to grow a lot bigger? These things are really, really important. And if you can't have that conversation between the investor and the founders, you're pretty damn well sure the founder certainly isn't having that conversation with their employees. And if they're not doing that, that's probably not the kind of company I want to invest in.
Okay, good. All right, very helpful. Look, do you have some time for questions? Maybe 5 or 10 minutes? We have a bunch of questions. All right, so and if you have a question, put it in the comments section. We'll take it. Let me just pound through them real quick, and hopefully Dustin get them up on the screen. Let me hit the first one real quick. It says, do the same points hold true that you've been discussing for cybersecurity, anti-fraud, compliance startups? Like, I know you focus a lot on cyber, but if you go wider across like secure tech.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons I brand that as cyber is so I don't get pitches on things like curing cancer, which, don't get me wrong, I want people to cure cancer. I'm probably not going to help you, figure out a way to do that. So, those things do hold true. What problem are you solving?
Right.
How do you solve it? And I've every now and then I'll be a like a guest judge, or I'll be on a panel for entrepreneurship, and I'll be paired with healthcare, innovation, robotics, aviation, that kind of thing. And I see the same patterns where people come in and they're following sort of the technology. AI is a great example, right? So people will pitch me an AI come and be all about the AI, and they'll never mention what problem are they solving or why would somebody want to buy this in the first place. So I do think they hold true.
Okay, same points hold true. Cool, great. Let's go to the next question. Do you find, this will be interesting, do you find that US East Coast versus West Coast cyber deals look different? We have their valuation or structure?
So they do look different, and but it's for a couple of reasons. Typically, the firms out west, if you think of Sand Hill Row, I mean, these people, they're on their 5th or 6th fund.
Right.
They've been doing this for a while. Right. If you come in, and this has happened to me, where I've looked at a company and been like, yeah, it will make money. It's not probably the most exciting thing that I want to work on. And they'll go out west, and I'll get a phone call as a diligence call, and it'll be like, hey, we're going to put in a lot of millions of dollars at this valuation when we're all really excited about it.
Right.
It's a little bit of a numbers game, and there's more venture out there. I'll just say as I think I know what I'm doing. Right. I'm also an LP in about 6 or 7 other cyber companies. I think all of these people.
Cyber funds, you mean?
Cyber funds, yeah. And it's on the website, Tech Operators, Forgepoint. These guys are all brilliant. They've got a lot more experience than me. They rarely ever invest in the same thing. They're all going in slightly different. I mean, the market's so big.
Right.
So it's pretty easy, I think, for a good cyber technology to get a great investor. And since there's more investors out west, it's possible that you're going to see it. It's changing. We're seeing a lot more funds on the East Coast, and so I think it's a great question.
Okay. All right, cool. Let's go to the next one. And you may have answered this, but do you invest in other types of security startups, non-cyber? Again, drone, counter drone, compliance, fraud. There's lots of things besides cyber, or do you just want to focus on cyber if people are
Yeah,
reaching out to you?
so we did invest in a company called Department 13, and they're based in Columbia, Maryland. I don't
What do
have
they
them
do?
on what they are a counter drone company. They can jam. They were in the basement of the Tenable building. I was happy to invest, but it's not something I have on the website
Right.
right now. And we do some non-cyber stuff, but I really try not to. It's just I'm trying to be very focused on
Got it.
cyber, which
Okay.
includes, which is funny. One of my favorite questions: what is cyber? Right? There's big data, there's IT analytics. I had like one of our companies, Automox, it's patch management. I've actually had somebody go, that's not a cyber company. I'm like, look, for like 20 years or for the last 2 3 years, I was trying to get them to go to RSA and get some more cyber investors, and now they're really doing amazing things,
Oh, that's awesome.
patching systems. But when I first met them, it was like software distribution.
Got it. Got it. Okay, let's go to our next question. Now, this is kind of interesting. I've heard this one before, actually. If PowerPoint froze on one slide during a pitch, what would you want it to be? So they lock up, they're in the middle of pitching you, and it freezes.
Yeah,
What
that
slide
first
should it
one,
be on?
the first slide.
The
What
what?
problem are you solving?
Got
What
it.
problem are you solving? Because I mean, and that's almost universal across. When I talk about other companies, and I have my co investors or people who didn't get a chance to invest, and they say, "Oh, we really." Sometimes it's the founder. Like some people are willing to put the founder first. Like, "Hey, I want to bet on the founder." And don't get me wrong, I want to create people who get that kind of reputation. That's kind of what I really want to do. But you're starting out, you've got to have a problem and solve it in a way that's going to really make a difference for everybody.
Got it. Okay, great. Let's move our next one. Just another 3 questions or so, perhaps 5 more minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. It says in 2020, any thoughts you're prognosticating with 3 weeks from the beginning of the year? What might heat up and cool down in cyber? Any predictions or expectations?
I love it. So I didn't have it in front of me. There's a woman in cyber. She
Yeah.
used AI and machine learning to come up with the predictions for 2020, and I
Oh my
thought
goodness.
they were great. And it was
Oh,
like 0-day AI algorithm, that kind of stuff. So I think there's going to be a lot of deep fakes coming out. That seems
deep fake video. Just
deep
yeah.
fake videos. I mean, I don't know how you make money on doing that, right? I'm not envisioning somebody.
For detecting deep fake videos.
Yeah, like I'm just and I've been pitched a lot of this stuff, and most of it is like really, really good cryptographic control over the photos that you and your employees take and the videos
Right.
that you and you take. But if
Right.
somebody took this screenshot or took this
You're
and
done.
changed me or put sunglasses on me or something like that, there's ways to detect that by looking at the pixels. But if you're really good, you can't detect any of that, right?
Right.
There's a lot of ways around that, and that's really what I want to like. I would love to be watching the news and having something going on. Hey, this was an unauthenticated, feed or something like that. And there's amazing tech out there that
Right.
survives, resolution changes and that there's some really, really cool stuff. But it's just not something that I think is going to be ready just yet.
Right. So you're looking for end-to-end encryption in video, right? Like what I'm watching on my
We have
screen
that.
came from the camera.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that stuff exists, but the way
Right.
media is distributed to us, we don't have any. We have literally we have not enough trust in our media already, but the actual delivery mechanism, I think, is interesting. And I'm holding back a little bit on some of the stuff I've seen, but yeah, I think there's going to be more of this stuff coming at the general public in the next year and a half.
Have you seen, just this isn't the question, but I saw it a couple weeks ago. There's a company on the flip side of that. They make deep fake videos.
Yeah.
But it's
Oh,
the
yeah.
commercial. Have you seen that? With the ads and
the fake Joe Rogan, I think.
yeah, for commercial purposes. It was kind of crazy. It's like frightening, but anyway.
One of the things I think is going to be interesting is provable AI. I've seen a couple companies pitch that. One of our companies that we've invested in indirectly through Workbench out of New York City.
Yeah, I know
They have a
that.
company called Arthur AI that kind of learns what your AI does and can kind of tell you if it changes.
Interesting.
Not necessarily going rogue, but just
Right.
change, right? Like literally like, hey, people you were approving loans for, 6 months ago, you're not approving loans for now. You might want to look at your model, that kind of
Wow.
stuff.
Oh, interesting. It watches the AI. Okay, let's go. 3 more questions and we'll wrap up. Manu Singh asked on LinkedIn, will you provide guidance on launching and executing your startup ideas? Or do we need to present the startup to you with like proven results? I guess that's like your number 3 in the middle of the Gula 5 slide is proof. Like, do they need to come with you proof or will you help them?
So like I'll get a lot of academics and consultants, and they'll say, "Hey, I got an idea to do X, Y, and Z." And I'll be like, "Look, hey, go ahead, tell me," because 90% of the time, the idea is not what makes the company. It's and I've had people say, "Hey, buy my patents and go build a company." I'm like, it's a lot more work than what you think. Having a great idea is important, but being able to build a company around that's more important than that. So how do you bring it to market? How do you sell it? What do you do? I'll give you a good example. So TrackOff was a company we invested in, and they were out of Baltimore, and they detect the creepy ads. Like, why are you still getting ads for tires after you bought tires weeks ago?
Right.
They sold to Avast. But before they sold to Avast, I gave them a whole bunch of ideas on, look, you could do these. Here's some other things you could be doing to maybe enter new markets and do more with this technology. So we do try to be active. I think, and most cyber investors are going to look for other ways that you can be more efficient bringing your tech out.
Got it. But I guess, would it be true, it's never too early to reach out to Ron Gula? Like if you have something you want to, send it forward, and the biggest thing is fit in the 5, right? What problem, what solution is, because I think you'd want to see things, even if it's early, rather see it a little bit early. Is that correct?
Yeah, I certainly don't mind. I'm a little backlogged, right? So
Okay.
it's between the work I'm doing with this defending digital campaigns and our portfolio companies and the pitches, I do like to get a pitch or at least see a demo.
Okay.
But here's the crazy thing. Like I've had people send me a pitch, and I'll just go to the website. They say, "Hey, we're going to do a demo like 2 weeks from now." So I'll go to the website. I'll read their white paper. I'll look at all their demos. And then I'll start asking them questions, and they'll be like, "Well, we haven't pitched you yet." I'm like, "Well, why do you got to pitch
We're
it?
beyond that.
It's on your website. This is you say what you do, and I have these questions based on what's on your. Oh, well, that's the website's getting redone. Okay, those are not good first introductions and calls with me at this point. Now you can still help everybody. I mean, I update our website all the time. But my point is yeah, I would say do a reach out, and we'll say I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. You can always hit up the investor at Gula Tech.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, we'll go to the next question, and one more after that, we're done. Jeff Sal asks, on the subject of enterprise sales, have you ever seen customer-funded development, an NRE or in a CISO organization?
Yeah. So your first, if you have a solution that's good for the enterprise, I've seen a number of different things. It could be a multi-year deal upfront, where maybe you get a 3-year, 4-year contract. I'm going to give you all that cash right now.
So customer-funded development.
Yeah. Yep. Because a lot of companies they're very aware that procurement for the enterprise can be tough. They're very aware that if they wait for the big companies, they might not keep up with the innovation. Just as people come and go, and that's usually a big red flag. By the way, if somebody says we're going to outbuild Cisco or Tenable, I don't think they realize how much resources those companies have. But having said that, it's hard to keep that innovation cycle up, for these really, really big public companies. So most large corporations are willing to work with some startups and entrepreneurs, and a great way to keep their attention and to keep them on mission, so to speak, even if they get acquired tomorrow, is to buy a 3-year, 4-year contract up front. And I've seen that happen quite. I consider that customer-funded development. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, and the thing I would just
the best kind.
Yeah, no, it's terrific. It's no dilution, right? The other thing, if people do that, we always try to be careful about it. Make sure it's like, who owns the IP after you build it, right? You have that work for hire provision. Just make sure you own what you build.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's that same question. If you have a startup, what's your product revenue? What's your services revenue? Well, if somebody gave you a 2-year services agreement to build all this tech, well, then that's tough, right? Try explaining that to a vendor, but taking a 2-year, 3-year thing and committing to a roadmap, boy, that's market validation. That's not dilution. That's a great situation to be in.
Okay, cool. Last question from Karam Chaudhry, if I pronounced that correctly. What does cyber disruption look like to you in the context of digital transformation? I don't know if you get that, but like what does disruption look like to you?
So that's a great softball question, right? So so one of the things I get to help out with is this thing called the Cyber Moonshot, where we're trying to make the internet safe and secure in 10 years. So when you really look at cyber, a lot of what we're doing in cyber is a provable, doable thing, right? We've got hygiene, we know how to build it, we can design security. It's not like there's this unknown area. And a lot of times what happens is people just aren't implementing things. You have a long tail of legacy things, you have budget issues, you have training issues, you have international. It's tough to run a big enterprise. So the question is, what does that look like when it's disrupted? It could be the cloud. I'm not so sure we're not reinventing everything. Every time, Amazon or Google or Microsoft, adds another feature or so, I think, it's harder for people to kind of get a hold of all that. So there's gonna be opportunities. And then God forbid anything bad ever happened in the cloud, and we had to swing back to on-prem as our first sort of deployment, for IT. It's gonna be interesting. So, when I look at disruption, I look at friction. I look at ease of deployment. I look at stuff, and we're just not there as an industry yet. Right. It's so hard to be 100% Microsoft shop or 100%, Amazon deployment and kill everything that's on-prem. We have a long way to go as an industry.
It's interesting just to point out, when you said disruption, what does it look like? You didn't say anything about the technical side. You talked about friction and ease of deployment.
Yeah, there's some technology that's never going to get deployed.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because we see a lot of times people don't realize, we talk about for startups, you can be clever on more than one axis. And there's lots of ways to win. It could be pricing disruption. It could be business model. It could be decreased friction, ease of deployment, where it's technically equal, but it's simple. You just turn it on and it works. People forget that.
And IT is so complex with so many different technologies that are in different states. It's so difficult to come in and figure out your footprint. And I'm starting to see pitches on third-party risk. Third-party risk was one of the best things in cyber that ever happened.
Right.
I think it's under-delivered a little bit because it's so hard to discover who you're dependent upon. There's a legal procurement dependent. There's like what is my network dependent on? And it's definitely coming. But
we have a company in that space. It's interesting. All right, cool. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Let me just wrap up real quick, and we'll let you and everybody else go off for the holidays. And thank you for being our last guest and being remote on Dreamit Live today. Just a couple of quick reminders just as we wrap up here. If you're interested in what we do at Dreamit, so first of all, if you're interested in getting an investment from Ron, he's terrific. He's in the Baltimore, D.C. area. You can see him at a Ravens game, but you can reach out to Ron. He has on his website his access information, or on LinkedIn. If you're interested in Dreamit and what we do and secure tech or any of our verticals, please apply. It's just dreamit.com/apply. Check out what we do on YouTube. We have these great episodes called Dreamit Doses, so if you have a chance, check out what we're doing on YouTube. It's great content, particularly, Ron, some of the things you hit on: total addressable market, go-to-market strategy, how to do competition. We have these little short 5-minute segments that are like exactly how to do it, and they're really good. Upcoming on Dreamit Live, the rest of January, we have quite a lineup. January 4th, we have Jeff Berman on from Camber Creek. That's in the Urban Tech Speak. Sorry, January 7th. Thank you, Dustin. January 16th, Peter, who you probably know, Ron, who's executive editor of CyberWire, is going to be in and talk a little bit about what happened in 2019 and 2020 forecast. And then later in January, we have Americus Reed, a good friend from Wharton, who's really great at brand building. How do you build brands and drive loyalty? And then we have 1 or 2 special guests coming into January. But that's what's coming up on Dreamit Live. You can find it. Go to dreamit.com/live to find out more. Ron, thanks for joining us today. Happy holidays. Thanks for putting up with the technical issues. Christmas. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever it is. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for joining us. Yeah?
Get somebody smart, the gift of entrepreneurship, and tell them to start a company.
There you go. That's a great gift. It's a great gift. Ron, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Take care.